Everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk about the modes of the natural and harmonic minor scales and how they correspond to various Middle Eastern scales or maqams. So to start, I'm just going to start with, the A minor scale, okay? So just as a review, this is the natural A minor scale, right? And if you make the G sharp, that's what you get, which is the A harmonic minor scale. Now, remember here that a mode is just kind of using the same exact set of notes, but starting in a different place, right? So the sort of regular, the Western modes, those are the ones we get from the natural minor scale or the major scale, essentially all the scales that you can play on the white keys of the piano, right? So you can also apply the same logic to the harmonic minor scale, right? So you can take the set of notes in the harmonic minor scale and just start in a different place, right? And you're going to get a completely different scale, right? So for the purpose of Middle Eastern scales, a couple of these are really important. Basically, we're going to focus on the Dorian and Phrygian versions of these, okay? So what I mean by Dorian and Phrygian versions of these would be the scales that we get, for example, starting using the set of notes in a harmonic minor, but starting in a D or an E, okay? So, let me give you an example of this. If I start here, right, and follow the notes of a harmonic minor, I will get, this is the scale that I'm going to get. Now, if I do the same thing and start instead from E, right, I'm going to get like that, okay? Now notice that all of these sort of by default sound Eastern because they all have an augmented second in them, right? That augmented second interval sort of is the most sort of stereotypically Middle Eastern sounding interval. However, these scales are different from each other because that augmented second is going in a different part of the scale, okay? So, again, for harmonic minor, let's say we have the one starting here, regular harmonic minor, this one, right, which would be the 4 mode of harmonic minor, and this one, which is the 5 mode of harmonic minor, okay? What would these be in Eastern music? Well, the first one is just harmonic minor in Western music. In Middle Eastern music, this goes by several names, but Nahawand or Nahawand is the most common one, right? And that basically follows the Western harmonic minor or natural minor, right? That 7th note is variable. Now the 4 mode, okay, so this one starts from here, has that beginning, okay? Now this placement of the augmented second, right? So where we start with a whole step, like that, has a very sort of characteristically Eastern European sound to it. In Middle Eastern music, this maqam is called Nikriz, okay? So but the thing about this is that the upper part of Nikriz is actually pretty variable, right? The thing that is the sort of most characteristic sound is that lower part. The upper part can take on a lot of different forms. Now, in Western music, this scale, the name for it is actually Ukrainian Dorian. So that name kind of makes sense if you think about it. It's obviously related to the Dorian scale in that it's the D, right? It's the D mode. It has a very sort of characteristically Eastern European sound, so it's Ukrainian Dorian. However, there's also a scale called Hungarian minor, which essentially takes the top part of this and puts a whole nother augmented second on top of it, right? So this one, I'm going to come back to that particular one in a little bit, but just remember that the upper part of this scale is variable. So in Eastern music, it's variable. In Western music, there's a couple different scale names that all basically hint to its association with Eastern Europe. So that's the 4 mode of the harmonic minor scale. The 5 mode of the harmonic minor scale is, if we start from here, is this, okay? Like that. Now, this scale is, in Eastern music, this is Hijaz, okay? There might be other maqams that start like this, but the most common one is Hijaz. Again, Hijaz has some microtones to it, but don't worry about that. In Western music, this is called the Phrygian Dominant scale, okay? So again, Phrygian because it's the E mode, dominant because the dominant chord is that, this major chord that's used in the harmonic minor scale, okay? Like this, okay? Now in actual usage, the Hijaz scale sometimes takes on this, right? So we have this, this sharpening is used sometimes, this sort of C sharp, and then goes back to Hijaz, okay? But other than that, it's basically a pretty straightforward scale. Now, let me talk quickly about modes of natural minor. So remember that the natural minor modes are just the same thing as the regular Western modes, okay? So of these natural minor, this scale is sort of just part of the Nahawand or Nahawand in Eastern music. So Nahawand can use both harmonic and natural minor, right? Now the Dorian scale, so scales very close to Dorian are used a lot in Middle Eastern music, but they tend to have some sort of very characteristic microtones that they're not just kind of small alterations of the note, right? It's sort of like in this case, I'm playing this from D. The microtone would be that the second note here would be halfway between the E and the E flat. So that really changes the sound. So you can approximate that with Dorian, but it changes the sound enough that I wouldn't consider Dorian to be common in Middle Eastern music. But the Phrygian scale is very common. Okay, so the Phrygian scale so this scale here is basically called Kurdi in Turkish or Kurd in Arabic. Okay, so anytime you see that, that's basically talking about the sort of standard, a scale that's basically the same thing as the standard Western Phrygian scale. Okay. Now, before moving on to one other thing, let me talk a little bit about Spanish music, because Spanish music, or specifically flamenco, kind of has a modal structure that basically mixes two of the different Phrygians, right? Phrygian Dominant and regular Phrygian, okay, with a specific chord pattern. So if you just take the regular Phrygian scale, right, and kind of try to harmonize it, you end up with this chord progression. Like that, okay? So what that means is that up till this point, the chord progression sounds very similar to what you'd expect in Spanish music, but then it ends with a minor chord, okay? So this ending with a minor chord is something that you would hear a lot in sort of harmonization of Turkish music or Balkan music. It wasn't necessarily there in the traditional music because harmony wasn't used a lot, but in sort of contemporary usage, this is kind of a very common chord progression, okay? But again, this is not used, so ending on a minor chord like that is not used in Spanish music. Instead, what's done is, okay, so this is the kind of stereotypical Spanish chord progression. If you think about this is a chord progression that, unlike most chord progressions, is not actually using the notes in the melody, right? So, right, that is just kind of a Phrygian descent. However, this last chord contains a G sharp, right? And the G sharp there is kind of implying that you're in in minor or Hijaz, right? So really what that sort of Spanish thing is doing is it's mixing Phrygian and Phrygian Dominant and Harmonic Minor, except unlike a sort of traditional Harmonic Minor, it doesn't have to end on the A minor, right? So traditional Harmonic Minor, right, wants to resolve here, right? That's this kind of like that. Spanish music often just ends here, right? So you can kind of think of that as sort of something that's halfway between several of these scales. Okay, so kind of a special case. Now, okay, so far we've basically talked about 6 scales, right? So I talked about the natural minor and the harmonic minor, and for each of these we have the original scale and then 2 modes. Okay, so what I said is that of the natural minor scale, the 5 mode Phrygian is very important and commonly used in Eastern music. That one is Kurdi or Kurd, and for harmonic minor, the 4 mode and the 5 mode are very important. Okay, so especially the 5 mode is actually much more common, but the 4 mode is used a lot in Eastern European music. Its makam name is Nikriz, and in Western music it has names like Ukrainian Dorian, right? And then an altered version of it is Hungarian minor. And then the 5 mode is Hijaz, and that's Phrygian Dominant. Okay, I'm going to show 2 more variations here. So I was talking a little bit. I said I'd come back to the Hungarian minor scale. So let's first go to Hijaz, right? So from here, right? So there's a variation of this that puts an augmented second in the second half of this too. Okay, so we get the scale that's like that. Okay, so this is essentially a scale that has a double augmented second sound, and I can get to this scale by starting from a harmonic minor and just making this note, right? So making the D sharp 2. Now, in Middle Eastern music, this is the closest makam to this is Hijaz Kyar. So, it's like Hijaz with a K-A-R at the end of it. Obviously, this is not a common scale in Western music. It does have a technical name, double harmonic major, or the Byzantine scale. But obviously, it's not a Western scale. It's used in movies and stuff to sort of signify the Middle East in a really obvious way. In actual Middle Eastern music, this is a scale that exists, but it's not one of the most common ones. So it's less common than Hijaz. It's less common than regular minor or major even. But it is a makam that exists, right? So like this. Now, that thing of putting an extra augmented second on the top half, you can do that with Nikriz too. So for here, I'm gonna do that in a different key. Okay, so since I was showing Nikriz from D, okay, I'm gonna do that alteration and keep it from D. So in this case, we get that, right? Right, so this is not in the exact same key, the notes, so that you can see here that the notes fell differently. If you wanted to think of this as sort of in the same way as, continuing with the logic of modes, right? This would be E Hijaz Kyar, okay? Then we would have A Nikriz or A Hungarian minor. Right? So the key thing here is that you get, right? You get sort of 2 augmented seconds stacked on top of each other, and that's what gives these 2 scales its distinctive sound. Okay, so again, a reminder here that the actual makams tend to have much more variable scales, right? There tends to be like a main scale or like main half of a scale, and maybe the upper half is variable or it's different on the way up and down and that kind of thing. For the particular scale, Nikriz is the defining feature. Is really that. It's really the bottom half, and the top half is the one that's variable. Okay. Now, okay, so this kind of gives a lot of very modal way of thinking about these scales. I want to quickly sort of run through playing these different scales, how we would do this from one fixed note, right? So for example, here, if we want to start on E, right, we can get different, we can get sort of basic ways to play all these scales, starting with natural minor. Like that, right? Harmonic minor. Like this, okay? Now Phrygian. Which is also Kurd or Kurd. Now harmonic minor or Hijaz. Right. Now going back to natural minor, because Nikriz is closer than this, we can start like natural minor, but I'm going to play Nikriz here. So, right, that's where this is the harmonic minor put in the second part, like Nikriz. So that scale is Nikriz or Ukrainian Dorian. This is the one that's called Hungarian minor, or also Nikriz, but with an augmented second on the top half. Right? So these are just kind of some of the scales. You can sort of think of the relationships between them. A lot of the ones, a natural minor and Phrygian, for example, are apart by only one note, right? So if you start from the same place, you only have to change one note to get from one to the other. Regular Phrygian and Phrygian Dominant are also only apart from one note, right? So if you kind of, if you play around with that stuff, you're also going to see that they relate to each other in different ways besides just being modes of each other.